My name is Camille. I still remember the knock as if it split the night in two, slicing my life into before and after that moment. When I opened the door, I found Mom trembling and Dad holding himself as if he had been made smaller by someone he once trusted. They were silent at first, only looking at me as if asking permission to feel safe again. I brought them inside, wrapped a blanket around Mom, sat with Dad until his hand stopped shaking, and only then asked what had happened. They told me that my sister Elise had decided the house belonged to her, that she had locked them out after an argument about money and control, and that she refused to let them back in. I have known Elise for years, and I have watched her take charge of family affairs until no one dared to push back. But I had never seen her drive our parents out into the cold. That sight changed everything I had been telling myself about patience and loyalty. So I told Elise calmly and without theatrics that she had 24 hours to apologize. I made it clear that if she chose silence, she would have to face consequences that went beyond family gossip and private anger. If you were the one opening the door at 1 a.m. seeing your parents in tears, what would be the very first thing you'd do? Share it in the comments. To understand how things reached this point, I have to go back. I grew up in the same house as Elise, yet it often felt like we were living in different worlds. From a young age, Elise seemed to carry a certainty about everything she said and did. She spoke with the kind of confidence that made adults pause and listen. When she wanted something, she found a way to make the room revolve around her voice. I, on the other hand, learned early to watch from the edges, to feel the currents under the surface instead of commanding them. Mom often leaned on Elise in subtle emotional ways. Elise knew how to offer comfort that placed her at the center of the moment. If Mom was overwhelmed, Elise would step forward first, speaking in gentle tones that made her seem irreplaceable. It was not loud or dramatic, but it shaped the way decisions formed in the house. Dad rarely challenged it. He valued peace in a way that meant silence came easier than disagreement. He believed that if no one raised their voice, then everything was fine. I believed that too for a long time. Growing up, I often felt like I had to make myself smaller to keep the balance. Elise spoke and people listened. I listened and people thought I was simply quiet. As we got older, Elise took on more authority in family matters. She became the one Mom consulted when it came to holidays, finances, or how relatives should be handled during gatherings. Dad would sit back, nod, and smile like everything was under control, even when it was clear that the weight of decisions rested on Elise's desires. I left home as soon as I was able. I wanted a life that was not shaped by comparisons or silent compromises. I worked, I rented a small place, and I built a routine that felt like my own. I did not cut ties, but visits always had a rhythm that reminded me of how things had been. Elise would update Mom on family matters with a tone that suggested she was the caretaker of the family narrative. Mom would accept it with gratitude that left me feeling like a visitor in a home where I had grown up. When I returned for holidays, it became clearer how Elise's influence filled the space. She decided how responsibilities were divided, what conversations were acceptable, and how issues should be handled. If anyone tried to express themselves outside of that structure, the atmosphere shifted. Elise had a way of responding that made the other person feel irrational or ungrateful. The house never erupted in open conflict, but the tension was always present, like a low electrical hum running under every conversation. I kept my distance, but distance did not erase the patterns. I could feel the slow erosion of Dad's voice as he chose silence again and again. I saw how Mom relied on Elise for validation even when it cost her comfort. I saw how Elise believed she was maintaining the family, when in reality she was shaping it to fit her reflection. Looking back, I understand now that the conflict did not begin the night my parents came to my door. It began years earlier in small decisions, in the quiet acceptance of imbalance, in the way we all learn to adapt, rather than question. The night at 1 in the morning was not the start. It was simply when the truth could no longer be contained. That night, I woke up at 1 in the morning to the sound of someone knocking repeatedly at my door. The knocking was not loud, but it was urgent, steady and unrelenting, and it cut through the quiet of my apartment like something was about to break. I got up, walked through the dark hallway, and when I opened the door, I saw Mom and Dad standing there in the cold. Mom's shoulders were shaking, and Dad looked as if he had been trying to hold himself together long enough to reach me. Neither of them spoke immediately. They just stood there with the kind of exhaustion that came from something deeper than lack of sleep. I stepped aside and let them in. I guided Mom to the couch and brought a blanket from the closet. I put water to boil and made tea without saying anything, because every part of that moment told me that asking questions too soon would only make things worse. Dad sat at the edge of the couch as if he did not want to take up space. Mom held the blanket with both hands, gripping the fabric like she was afraid it might disappear. The silence stretched on for so long that time felt like something suspended in the room. I sat with them and waited. It took a while before Mom's breathing changed. She tried to speak once, but her voice failed. When she finally cried, it was not sudden. It was slow, like something breaking open one layer at a time. Dad put a hand on her back, but he did not say anything. His silence felt like something years old. When she could speak again, Mom said that Elise had locked the door and told them they could leave if they did not like the rules of the house. I listened as Mom explained that the argument had begun over finances. Elise had suggested that because she was handling most of the household expenses, she should have more authority in decisions. Mom and Dad disagreed. The disagreement escalated into something that was not about money anymore. It became a question of control. When Mom said the words "locked us out," I felt something shift inside me. It was as if every subtle imbalance we had all accepted over the years had finally taken its most visible form. Elise did not just win an argument. She decided that the house belonged to her alone, and that Mom and Dad could be pushed out if they were not obedient to her expectations. I did not react with immediate anger. What I felt was a quiet and steady clarity. I realized that everything I had been trying to overlook had reached the point where silence was no longer a neutral act. I told Mom to rest and let her lean against me. I told Dad to take his time before speaking because I could see he was trying to choose words that did not hurt. We stayed like that for a long time. The night outside was still, but the room felt like the center of something shifting. I knew I could not allow Elise to keep that kind of power over them. I had stepped back for years thinking distance would keep peace, yet here peace had turned into permission for cruelty. That was the moment I decided to protect them truly, protect them for the first time in my life. The next morning, I called Elise. I remember how steady my voice sounded even though my hands were still warm from holding Mom's the night before. When she answered, her tone was casual, almost bored, as if nothing significant had happened. It was the tone she used when she believed the world was already arranged in her favor. I asked where Mom and Dad were supposed to stay for the night. There was a brief pause, a soft breath on the line, and then Elise replied that they would be fine. She said it the way someone might speak about strangers, not parents who had raised us both. I told her they had knocked on my door at 1 a.m, exhausted and shaking, and her silence stretched just long enough to become its own confession. Then she began her performance. Elise said Mom had exaggerated things again. She said Dad never spoke up when things got emotional. She spoke as if she were the only rational one, the only person capable of understanding the situation correctly. I listened carefully. I noticed how she did not deny the act itself. She simply rearranged the narrative so that she could remain innocent. When I told her there was no justification for locking our parents out of the house, she laughed softly in disbelief, as though I had just failed to grasp a complex concept. She said Mom needed to learn boundaries. She said Dad enabled her. She said I always rushed to rescue them because I could not handle conflict. The tone was measured and almost gentle, which made it all sharper. Elise never raised her voice to win. She made others feel foolish instead. As I began to respond, another voice came in, confident and practiced. My sister's husband Anthony had clearly been listening. He spoke with the polished assurance of someone used to negotiating or closing deals. He said the situation had been blown out of proportion. He said that he and Elise were simply maintaining order in the house. He suggested that Mom and Dad were being dramatic to gain sympathy. I noticed that his statement, like Elise's, avoided the simple fact that they had forced our parents outside in the cold. I asked Anthony why he felt the need to involve himself in a conversation between two sisters. He replied that family matters required shared leadership. I let the words settle before asking whether shared leadership included abandoning two aging parents at night. There was a pause before Elise took over again, her tone sweeter now, as if to soften the impression her husband left. She insisted they would have let Mom and Dad back inside if they had just calmed down. I realized she believed the act of exclusion was justified because she had decided her emotions were more reasonable than theirs. Something inside me shifted. I had always accepted the frame Elise built around events. I had always let her define reality because resisting required energy that I had once convinced myself I did not possess. But in that moment, the distance between what was true and what was being spoken became impossible to ignore. I told Elise I would not debate the morality of abandoning our parents outside their own home. I said the facts were clear. I said she had 24 hours to apologize, and that apology needed to be directed first to Mom, then to Dad, and then to me. I said the apology must acknowledge what had happened without excuses or alternate explanations. Elise asked what would happen if she refused. I told her she would see the consequences firsthand. She laughed again, but there was a brief tremor beneath it, a small signal of something uncertain. I ended the call without raising my voice. That afternoon, I met my lawyer, Ms. Kingston. I had spoken to her for other matters before, but never with a situation that touched the core of my family. When I walked into her office, the quietness of the room contrasted sharply with the turmoil still sitting in my chest. I sat across from her, placed my hands on the table to steady myself, and told her everything that had happened the night before, without dramatizing any detail. I wanted clarity, not sympathy. Ms. Kingston listened with full presence, her expression composed in a way that did not soothe, but instead allowed me to feel the seriousness of the situation. When I finished speaking, she adjusted her glasses slightly and explained that Alabama law holds specific protections for aging adults who may be financially dependent or vulnerable to coercion. She explained that neglect is not only physical abandonment, but can also include deliberate emotional isolation or withdrawal of access to resources necessary for daily living. Her voice remained steady without urgency as she noted Elise's action of locking Mom and Dad outside the house could be interpreted as a form of coercive control. I felt the weight of her words. I had always known Elise's behavior was manipulative, yet hearing the legal framework for what had happened changed the texture of my understanding. This was not merely a difficult family dynamic. It had become something that could change the course of our lives if left unchecked. Ms. Kingston asked whether Mom and Dad had been relying on Elise financially. I told her that Elise had taken over bill payments, scheduling appointments, and managing the household budget under the guise of helping. At first, Mom had welcomed the relief. Dad had allowed it because he disliked disputing matters that could be avoided. Over time, Elise had positioned herself as the essential figure in the house, the one through whom all needs must be filtered. I had seen it from a distance, but I had not recognized the structure forming beneath it. Ms. Kingston gently pointed out that this pattern aligned with financial dependency that could escalate into control. She said the question was not whether Elise intended harm. The law cared more about whether harm was occurring. Her distinction cut through every justification I had used for years. I asked what I needed to gather. She instructed me to begin collecting bank statements where Elise's name or oversight appeared, text messages that showed dismissive or controlling language, any record of household decisions being made without Mom or Dad's input, and evidence of the night they were locked outside, such as timestamps, call logs, or messages. She told me to move with intention, but also with patience, because these cases required clarity, not haste. When I returned home, I sat with Mom and Dad at the kitchen table. I explained everything slowly, not because they could not understand, but because acknowledging all of this required a kind of emotional breathing space. Mom listened with her hands folded, her eyes lowered as though trying to recall when exactly she had handed over her authority without noticing the moment it slipped. Dad sat upright, but I could see something in his posture begin to falter as he realized how much of their life had been rearranged beyond his awareness. They were not angry. They were tired. A tiredness that did not come from one night outside, but from years of slowly shrinking within the walls of their own home. I began collecting documents that evening. Not in secret, but without informing Elise. Not out of vengeance, but because the truth needed to be seen without distortion. I was preparing, but also waiting. I had given Elise 24 hours to apologize. If she chose to face what she had done, then this would remain within the family. If she refused, then the situation would no longer be held in silence. I could feel the shift inside myself. Not anger, not triumph. Just certainty. The line had already been crossed. Now I was drawing it back. Exactly 24 hours later, Elise was still silent. I had waited longer than I promised myself I would. The house was calm that morning, the air heavy with the quiet acknowledgement that whatever came next would change our family permanently. Mom sat by the window, folding and refolding a handkerchief, and Dad stared at his coffee without drinking it. I understood that they were waiting for me to decide something they themselves could not bring themselves to do. So I opened my laptop. I did not write with anger. I wrote to record the truth, so that there would be no more shadows or unspoken allowances. I described the night I woke to the pounding at my door, how Mom's hands trembled, how Dad could not raise his voice to explain what had happened. Then I explained the financial dependency that had grown slowly and quietly within their household, how decisions had stopped belonging to them and started belonging only to Elise. I wrote that locking your parents outside of the home they bought and maintained was not a moment of stress but a demonstration of power. I did not accuse Elise of being cruel. I did not insult her. I did not call her names. I simply walked through every step of what had taken place and allowed the facts to show their own weight. I finished the post by saying that what happened to my parents could happen to any aging couple who stopped noticing exactly when they stopped choosing for themselves. Then I clicked share, and I went to make tea for Mom. The reaction was immediate, not because the story was dramatic, but because the community already knew pieces of it. Several people in Mobile had seen Mom and Dad walking alone late at night on more than one occasion. A neighbor recognized the nights, remembered the confusion in their expressions. Comments began to appear from people who had noticed tension at church or seen Elise speaking sharply to Mom in the grocery store parking lot. The story did not erupt because of my words. It erupted because the truth had already existed in many small moments, and now those moments had a place to gather. Elise reacted within an hour. She posted that I was exaggerating, that Mom and Dad had simply stepped outside after an argument, that I was stirring resentment for attention. Her words were polished and measured, but the defensiveness beneath them was unmistakable. Some people believed her at first, but then the tone shifted when Anthony entered the conversation. His comment was not composed. He called my post a betrayal, said I was trying to ruin their life, accused Mom of being dramatic and forgetful. His language was sharp enough to make people pause. It was the first time many had seen how he spoke when he felt threatened. The responses beneath his comment changed the direction entirely. People asked why a daughter-in-law and her husband thought it acceptable to lock aging parents outside at night. Others pointed out that financial control is real harm whether it is intentional or not. A few spoke about caring for their own parents and said they could never imagine closing their door to them. The conversation was no longer mine. It belonged to everyone reading it, weighing it, and reaching their own conclusions. Elise stopped responding after that. The silence she once used to maintain power now left her exposed. Anthony deleted his comment, but screenshots were already circulating. The community had formed its own understanding. No amount of denial could change it. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a kind of stillness, the kind that comes when something long resisted finally settles into its true shape. I had not destroyed my family. I had revealed what was already there. In the weeks that followed, everything changed so quickly I had to hold my breath to keep up. The city seemed smaller, as if every street in Mobile carried a whisper from the day the truth stepped into light. I did not feed the conversation or try to direct it. I let the facts continue their quiet work, while I focused on protecting the two people who had always tried to protect me. Elise learned what silence feels like when it is no longer a weapon. The women who organized charity luncheons stopped copying her on messages. The choir director thanked her for past service and reassigned her solos without ceremony. She kept arriving on time, dressed as carefully as ever, but invitations thinned until there were none left to accept. Smiles at the church doorway turned polite, then cool, then absent, and the committees that once leaned on her began to function without her voice at the center. Anthony faced consequences in a different register. Clients who had laughed easily at his stories cut meetings short, and colleagues who had admired his confidence changed the subject when he approached. His manager scheduled a check-in that asked about judgment and communication rather than performance metrics. People did not accuse him of anything. They simply stopped trusting him to read a room, and in the quiet inside that realization, his authority thinned. I did not announce any of this. I stayed with Mom and Dad, folding their routines into my own apartment until the days made a new pattern that felt sturdy. Mom learned the password to her online bank account again and wrote it down in her own handwriting, then tucked the paper into a place only she knew. Dad started carrying a small notebook where he listed bills, due dates, and questions he wanted to ask before decisions were made. I watched their shoulders straighten with each small task reclaimed, not because independence makes you proud, but because choice returns dignity in a way nothing else can. We moved them out of Elise's house with steady movements and a neutral tone. I chose a weekday morning when the street was quiet, and I came with boxes, labels, and a friend to help carry heavy things. Mom packed photographs she had stopped noticing on the walls. Dad removed tools from a garage he had once called his refuge, and placed them in a trunk with a care that felt like a ceremony. Elise did not appear. She sent a 2-sentence text that said we were being dramatic. I did not answer. A week later, I sent Elise a message that was as plain as I could make it. I said Mom and Dad would not be returning to her home. I said all financial decisions would now be made by them, with help only when they requested it. I said there would be no more conversations that tried to turn facts into confusion. I said I was finished standing inside a story she authored. I wished her well, and stated that I would not be available to her moving forward. Elise did not reply. She watched. I saw her account appear among the viewers of my posts, and then vanish again. Friends told me she waited in the church parking lot until the last minute, as if running late would make her invisible, and that she left quickly after services without speaking to anyone. Anthony grew quiet in public as well, choosing corridors with fewer eyes and sending emails that sounded careful. It is a strange thing to witness power leave a person who used it carelessly. It does not depart loudly. It drains out of the room one assumption at a time. At home, the air changed. Mom began humming when she cooked. Dad reclaimed a Saturday ritual of oiling a wooden table that did not need it but shone afterward. We set boundary statements on the refrigerator like instructions for a new appliance, not because we needed reminders, but because the act of naming truth steadied us. There were no grand speeches. There was ordinary life, and in ordinary life, the most enduring repairs take root. People asked if I felt triumphant. I did not. I felt relief shaped like discipline, the kind that does not celebrate, only holds course. I did not cut ties to punish. I cut ties to stop participating in harm, and once I said it that way to myself, my decision became simple to live with. I did not revisit it, and I did not soften it. When the church sent out the next volunteer schedule without Elise's name, no one mentioned the omission. When Anthony's team reassigned a client to someone else, the meeting minutes recorded it as a standard rotation. Some endings look like announcements. Ours looked like a file quietly closed a door that no longer swung both ways. By the time Mom and Dad hung their coats by my front door, the new keys in their pockets felt light. We did not discuss Elise. We did not tally losses. We let our days become the proof that we could begin again. That night, I set an alarm for early morning. Now when I look back, I do not regret any decision I made. The weeks after everything became public unfolded with a clarity that felt both sharp and strangely quiet, like standing outside after a storm and seeing only the branches left in new arrangements. The world around Elise did not collapse all at once. It shifted slowly in conversations that no longer welcomed her, in invitations that suddenly never reached her, in smiles that thinned when she approached at gatherings or events in town. The community had seen enough to understand what had been hidden behind her polished tone and carefully arranged expressions. They simply stepped back. Anthony experienced his own unraveling. The authority he had carried in his workplace softened, then dulled, then became something people avoided. Colleagues did not confront him. They simply recognized a pattern of dominance that no longer looked decisive but controlling. Some people are undone not by one dramatic reveal, but by the steady removal of the audience they once performed for. Mom and Dad settled into my home without urgency or apology. They moved gently back into themselves. I saw my father regain the steadiness in his breathing, his shoulders no longer locked in a posture of bracing for the next command. My mother began humming again while folding laundry, an old habit from my childhood that I had not heard in years. Peace is quiet, but it is unmistakable when it returns. As for Elise, there were no dramatic confrontations, no sudden apologies, no confessions of guilt. There was only silence from her, but not the silence of confidence. It was the silence of someone who had lost the stage. She watched from afar through shared acquaintances or online spaces, but she no longer had access to speak into our lives. I made the choice to cut ties entirely not out of anger, but out of clarity. She had always believed power came from being needed. I learned that power sometimes comes from walking away. I did not win. There was no victory to declare, no moment of raising a flag over conquered ground. I simply stopped carrying what was crushing me. I put down a weight that had been disguised as duty for far too long. And once I let it go, I understood that boundaries are not walls built to isolate. They are doors that open only for what deserves to stay. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that love alone cannot make a relationship healthy or safe. Boundaries are not punishments. They are acknowledgments of where pain has been allowed to grow unchecked. When we choose to step back, we are not abandoning the people we once cared for. We are refusing to let the parts of them that harm us continue to dictate our lives. Choosing peace is not cruelty, it is maturity. Thank you for listening to my story. I know situations like mine are more common than many are willing to admit. If you have ever had to choose distance in order to protect yourself or someone you love, your experience matters. I would like to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place, and what do you believe defines a fair boundary in a family? Your perspective might help someone else.